into today's episode. Today on The Growth Shift, we're joined by Richard Broo, the founder of True North PMP Consulting. Richard's career is a masterclass in operational excellence and strategic process development, forged over decades in the plastics industry with giants like Owens Corning and General Electric. As a certified project management expert, Richard has a proven track record of reducing costs by $150,000 per project and driving $35 million in new product sales by building robust process frameworks. Now, he bridges this aha moment insight to small and medium-sized companies, embedding himself within their teams to implement sustainable project management solutions. His insights into de-risking product development, optimizing operational efficiency, critical importance of process, offer a powerful blueprint for any business seeking to accelerate growth. Richard, welcome to The Growth Shift.
Welcome, David, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Great to have you on today, Richard. Your journey spans decades in the plastics industry, working for Fortune 500 companies like Owens Corning and General Electric. Tell us a little bit more about that journey that you were on and your foundational experiences that shaped what it is that you're doing today.
Well, I was sort of born into the industry. My father had a couple hundred injection molding machines when I was growing up through high school and college. So you can call it indenture servitude, but that's where I learned my craft. I learned about how to injection mold, how to do tooling. But when I finally got out of college, I didn't want to be tied to machinery. I wanted into the material side of the business because I felt that's where the future of the industry lied. So I was fortunate enough to have a lot of people help me get into companies like General Electric Plastics, where obviously I started as an individual contributor and then worked my way up into the management ranks. And so having done that and then helping at Owens Corning, I had decided after 38 years of being in corporate America that I really wanted to take what I had learned, and not just as a kid working for my dad, but going through all the GE and the Owens Corning trainings, that I wanted to get back to industry. And now you say, well, Rich, why would you want to do that? Well, if you look at the project management industry, it's stagnant. And when I say stagnant, I mean that only 31% of all projects come in on time, on budget, with all their deliverables. 50% of all projects are called challenged. That means they're over budget, they're over schedule, they're not delivering. 19% of all projects just fail outright, no value. And lastly, on average, companies waste 11.4% of their budgets on a project. So now, if you and I have a project, you can count on 11.4% of that money just going to waste. So, and it's been that way for the last several years. Those statistics haven't changed. So I got to the point when I left corporate America to say, look, I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, I understand how things work in project management and product development. The big companies like GE and Owens Corning, they have people like what I did on staff. But the small to medium-sized companies don't. They either don't have the personnel, they don't have the training, they don't have the vendor base that can step in to help them out. So that's why I said, I see a gap here and I wanted to fill that gap. So that's what got me today with my passion to help small to medium-sized businesses become a lot more efficient at product and project management so they don't experience the mistakes that those statistics that I just shared with you.
Yeah, and those are some pretty scary statistics, right? You said something like 50% of all projects today are either, behind the project timelines, over budget, they're stagnating, and you said 19% of them fail altogether. Where my mind goes with this is that, maybe project managers and team members are shooting for the stars, let's say. They're falling behind. They're saying, oh, we're going to get it done in this time, in this budget to make their employers happy. But, from your experience, what's really driving these problems? 50% projects behind, 19% failing. What's the crux of the problem here?
There's two really big crux. One is not understanding what the scope of a project is. What are we going to do here? What's in scope and what's out of scope? You would be surprised a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, they don't even do project scoping. They say, we're going to go do this. We're going to go build this mouse. We're going to go build this coffee maker. And they just start going for it. Great. But what are you shooting for? What does this thing really have to do? And what doesn't it have to do? Because what it doesn't, you don't want to touch that stuff. Because if you do, now you're in scope creep. So that is one of them, just not understanding what you are looking at. And that comes down to project scoping. The other thing that you will find with small to medium-sized businesses, if you're a project manager, you might be assigned over 3 to 4 projects. Now, if you've got 3 projects underneath your command, you can't give any one of them your full attention. So therefore, as a project manager, if you're not coaching and mentoring those teams, they're basically doing what they think is right. Now, is it right or is it not right? But most of the time, they're deviating from the plan. And the last one is just lack of proper planning, budget, scope, resources. And the big one is risk. Small to medium-sized companies don't really do much risk management. And I'll give you an example. My dad was a small business back in the 70s. Raw materials were rising on a weekly basis, as was the cost of tool steel. So every week his costs were going up. And I would say to him, can't you do anything about this? Can't you get a contract? But he would just let it come. Big companies don't do that. Small to medium, well, I guess I got to pay another 5 cents a pound for that resin. No, you don't. There are things you can do. You can have contracts tied to raw material indices. But my point is, the small to medium-sized companies, they don't act on that level. A lot of risk. They don't put enough time into the risk for the project or what they're trying to do and how they can mitigate or eliminate that risk. So those are the main reasons why things start to come off the rails.
Interesting. It sounds like even on the project manager side of things, and with what you were saying a couple of minutes ago, project managers generally are overworked. They're beyond their capacity. Perhaps they don't have the skills or the knowledge or the capability to, as you said, direct and train their teams properly to be able to run without them. But it sounds like there's also a confusion problem as well, right? Not fully understanding what the scope of a project should be and allowing the scope to creep while focusing on things that aren't inherently going to be valuable to the product that's being developed.
And there are 2 schools of project management. There's variants thereof. There's traditional project management, which I grew up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And there's agile. In traditional project management, you're supposed to do all this upfront planning to figure out what you're going to do. And then you put a project plan around that, your scope, your budget, your schedule, your resources. If you don't spend in traditional project management enough upfront time to say, what does David's company really want? Why do they want it? What value does it bring David's company? And what value does it bring David's company's clients? You got to put a lot of effort into that. And a lot of times companies don't do that. Now, when you come to agile, that's like going out into the great ether. Well, we don't know how to make this in total. We've got about 70% of it in our head. We can do this, but there's 30% never been done before, don't know how to do it. So it's a completely different project approach. But you still, and then you iterate up to what the final product will be. But if you don't start that planning process properly, again in Agile, and if you don't, by what you learn as you iterate, apply what you learn in iteration to the next generation or the next iterate, like phones. They'll make a phone in version 1, version 2, version 3, if you're not taking what you're learning from those iterations and applying it to the next iteration, it's like shooting in the dark. What am I shooting at here? And that's the other thing that I see is Agile project management seems to be the sweetheart. Everyone wants to do Agile. But if you apply Agile to a traditional project, it's not going to work, and vice versa. So when it doesn't work with the customers will say, well, the project stinks, Agile stinks. No, it doesn't. You applied the wrong approach to the project, which is why the project is failing.
Rich, you're sharing some really valuable insights here about project management broadly. Through your time in corporate, with all of the experiences that you've had and the projects you've led, what was the biggest growth shift moment that you've experienced that really allowed you to see project management differently?
My first growth shift moment came when I was at General Electric. They wanted to improve their product development and project management process. And at that time, I'm going back into the late 80s, there was several plants across the United States. But each plant site did its own thing. There was no consistency from, Mount Vernon, Indiana to Mount Vernon, Indiana to Ottawa up in Canada, to Selkirk, New York. And they were experiencing issues like they couldn't get products to market in less than a year. They had, I don't want to call it rampant, but the finances were loosey-goosey because it was by site. So that, I was asked to go and take a look at that. And my aha moment is I've got 5 or 6 plants here that aren't even communicating about what they're doing with each other, each doing a different thing, and there's no consistency here. So I went and I benchmarked all those plants, obviously, to see what was working well, what wasn't working well, and why. And of course, I solicited to them, tell me what changes you would like to see. Then, at the time, there were some companies that had won the Malcolm Baldrige Award for quality. One of them was Motorola. One of them was Ford. So I went and I benchmarked Ford, General Motors, Motorola, and Dell. And what I found there is they had a very structured, logical process by how projects are initiated, planned, executed, controlled, and closed. And so I took the best practices of those companies, blended them with what I found in the GE system, and I created for all of GE Plastics a new product development and commercialization process that was taken out through all the different plants. And you mentioned to it earlier, the result of that was we reduced cycle time to market by 25%. There was $35 million of sales to new products. And on average, a product project, the cost of that was reduced by $150,000. Now you can say, well, that's great, but what does that really mean? Well, when you have 20 projects going at one time and you multiply that by 150K, that's $3 million. So we standardized everything. And we piloted it out at one plant, it worked, and then we just took it out through the rest. That was my first aha moment. Say, I'm in a big Fortune 500 company, and it's like Pee-wee's Playhouse by what they're trying to do. So we actually buttoned it up a bit. It's still going on at GE. Well, it's now Sabic, but it's still going on there right now. So there must have been something good about that process.
Mm-hmm. It's always surprising to hear people who have led such great initiatives at Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. It's always surprising to hear that these companies still, or maybe at the time, don't have their shit together in so many ways, right? Like you should have cohesive processes from the top down that you can scale. Or the company scale, the company is massive. Why have so many disparate processes, people doing different things, operating in different ways, different costs at different locations? Just doesn't seem to make sense. That's an incredible realization, incredible impact that you were able to have. And, this is what you really took to True North PMP Consulting, right? You took the intelligence of designing these systematic processes, and now you bring them to small and mid-sized businesses, companies who, until recently, or even still today, don't really have that level of insight and experience available to them. Rich, tell us a little bit more about really what you're doing with your clients and what this looks like in play.
I concentrate on small to medium-sized businesses because they may lack the personnel, the training, and the resources. And when I approach a customer or when they come to me with a problem, I tell them, this is what I can do for you. Yes, I can put in processes, but a process is a process. What's the ultimate goal here? If you want to become more operationally efficient, I can help you do that. If you want to reduce cycle time to revenue, I can do that. If you want to reduce risk and waste, I can do that. Well, how do you do that? I've taken what I've learned over the course of my career. I've taken my training as both an agile and a traditional project management, my training. And I go in, I look at what's working within their organization. You don't want to throw away what's working good. We identify the bottlenecks and the root cause of the bottlenecks, and we put in root cause corrective action so we can achieve the things that I just discussed. And what makes us a little bit more unique is we're not interested at True North just to give, say, you or another client a recommendation and walk away. You can go to any number of consultants from Plant Moran to McKenzie Phillips and any of them and get that. The real issue is what happens when you have to implement what's recommended. And a lot of companies will take the recommendations and try to implement them themselves. Well, I put it this way. The patient is sick. So you're telling the patient, go do this and you won't be sick. But it's the patient is still sick. Okay, I believe in putting skin in the game. So we embed ourselves with the customer to prove to them what we've recommended will